let's get this cover off. Then I'll probably go ahead and get the water pump off of it. This cover here is a lot like the valve cover itself, and that there are grommets around these bolts. Which this one's basically like glued on here, so it's kind of hard for me to show you. Just kind of need to readjust my camera a little bit. See, and this cover here should have just a giant piece of cork on it. Yep, got a little bit of oil running. Okay, that's about 90% of that off of there. And here's our little lifters. And your oil tube that has the O-ring, there's a hole right here that it goes into. And that's where it actually seals. Let's go ahead and get this water pump off of here. So kind of just working top down on this. It's got 3 bolts on the water pump. It's pretty easy. Get apart. Or, well, get off. They aren't hard to get apart either. I have to use a press to get them apart, but they're not hard. Okay, so there are 3 bolts with lock washers on them. There, the pump is off. Water pump will be sandblasted. Okay, now, so on this side of the block, we're going to pull these 2 studs from my injection pump off, or out, whatever you want to call it. And we got the little elbow right here for the oil pressure gauge. Had a little brain fart there. So I'll go ahead and get those those 3 pieces off. I'll go ahead and pull out the injection pump drive. These 2 bolts down here, these hex heads, or Allen head bolts. These actually bolt the oil pump on, so I'm not going to mess with those just yet. So this fitting here is an NPT 1/8 inch. No flare fitting or anything stupid like that. So we'll be able to clean it up and reuse it. Now, the drive, the manual, so you stick a screwdriver in here and turn it. And it basically rides the gear up, and you can grab a hold of it. Now the service manual does a good job of telling you how to index this back, so there's no need to really mark it or worry about it. Okay, so this side's done. Let's go ahead and get this crank pulley off. Alright. So it's 15/16. See if I can get this one to come out with this 3/8 gun. Okay, just a quick look. Looks like I have all original bolts down here, which I like to see. And it goes back to my OCD-ism. It looks like I got a new drain plug, because it's kind of red when it should just be blue, which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just one more piece I don't have to buy, because those things are notorious for getting rounded and messed up. Another great place for your impacts or ratchets. And the reason I'm taking this oil pan off before my timing cover, these two bolts here in the very front actually bolt up into the timing cover. So I'd have to get down here anyway and take them loose before the timing cover would come off. So I'm basically just going to go ahead and get an oil pan off now. These bolts, I'll probably just clean these up really well. Probably, you know, some gas or some brake cleaner or something. Let's pop this pan off, which is extremely loose. I mean, that thing wasn't stuck at all. That's probably why it was a grease bomb. Okay, and there's the bottom of the motor. A little dirty, not too bad, especially for a diesel engine. Now, in my comparison videos between this tractor and the 861, I mentioned how the 861 had an updated block with a balancer assembly. This right here is the balancer assembly. And they did it for some sort of harmonic reason. What? I don't know. But you basically have these two shafts in here to work together to create a balancing effect to dampen the harmonics. And there's a big gear in the middle of the crankshaft that spins these. And one note about the drain plug. I said it had a new one. You can buy the 8N drain plug for these tractors, but if you've ever changed the oil in the 8N, you know it has a big screen on it. Well, that screen comes off and you use just the metal plug, because diesel has a screen right here on the pickup, so you no longer need that screen on the oil filter, or oil drain plug rather. Okay, so to get this oil pickup and pump out of here, you can either take it out as an assembly or unbolt it here and here, here and here. which is probably what I'm going to do because I'm not 100% sure I'm going to use this oil pump. I don't know if this is an original oil pump. I don't know if the motor's been apart. The motor does have excellent oil pressure, like 60 pounds of oil pressure. So the pump's probably okay. But I do want to open it up and inspect it. So to open it up, I have to take all this off anyway. So go ahead and just unbolt it now while I got the motor helping hold it. So the first thing I want to do is this big old boy right here. This big nut has a lock tab around it. That nut is what's actually holding this balancer on. So this will have to be straightened and the nut spun, but I'm just going to worry about just the fitting at the moment. That nut there is now free. Just pop these loose. There is a seal right here. It's like a big chunk of rubber. Looks almost like a rubber hose somebody stuck in there. You can get those. And of course we have our little paper gaskets here. Do not put silicone on this, because no matter how little you put on there, it's going to ooze out. And it'll get up into your oil pump, and it'll lock up your oil pump if you're unlucky. If you're lucky, it'll just push it out through your filter. And then you might have oil pressure issues, or you may not. But it's just not worth the risk, especially when you can make that gasket there pretty simple, or purchase it. Okay. I want to go ahead and take this balance shaft, or balancer assembly. It's not really a shaft on this motor. Take this balancer assembly off. Now to do that, so you got these little lock tabs here that I'm going to have to knock down, and then just spin this big nut and this bolt out, and then this balance shaft comes off. Okay, I forgot about this little guy. This little guy here, this is actually the drive shaft for the oil pump. And one end goes into either your distributor, if it's your gas motor, or your injection pump drive on the diesel. The other end goes into the oil pump. Okay, that is 1.25 inch socket. So, this is our big oil feed bolt. It's hollow. And like I said, there's a seal right here. It says that seal is available. It looks like a giant piece of basically a radiator hose. Okay. And here's our balance assembly. Now, as you can see, one moves the other. These two gears should be in time with each other. That's all it is. This, while this motor's running, these things spin in there, and since they have weight on them, they're unbalanced, and that creates the balance for the engine to eliminate the harmonics. Okay, but here's this gear that drives our balancer. So at this point, we're ready to go ahead and pull out the oil pump, which that's these two large hex heads out here. And I say large because there is one little guy out here further up the drive. Actually, there is two. Yeah, I thought there was two. Those two I think might be oil galleys, but pretty much don't have to mess with them. It's these two large Allen head screws. It's going to take a 5/16 hex bit or Allen key. Probably better off with the hex bit if you have it. I can't get a wrench in there, so let me try my ratchet. So now I'm going to have a ratchet on the inside and a ratchet on the outside. Now these Allen bolts that hold the pump, they are a stepped shoulder, so don't break these, don't lose these. You just have to rock it if it'll cooperate with me, and it should pop free like so. Right here on the rear of our cam is this plate, and unfortunately it's hard to see with my engine stand in the way, but there's a bolt right there that is behind the crankshaft flange. Now there is a notch right here in the cam, or the crank, that will allow us to line that up with that screw so we can unscrew it. So those 6 screws right there I'm going to take out, and I'll be able to unbolt the gear that holds the rear cam gear for the hydraulic pump. Like I said, I have no idea why Ford thought it would be a good idea to use a flathead screw on this. So you're probably going to need just a set of needle nose vice grips. On the back side of our cam, there are 4 screws, or bolts rather. Take those 4 bolts out, that cam gear will come off, and then when we take the timing off the front, our cam will slide out the front of the engine. Okay, there's the 4 bolts. And then we'll just pry the gear off of the cam. And don't drop it, obviously. And there's your cam gear. Now, as you see, One side has a pretty deep lip, other one is pretty flat. The deep lip goes towards the front of the engine. Okay. That's all we got to do on the rear of the engine. So now, let's get the timing cover off. So everything's going to be a 1/2 inch socket again. Now these are different lengths. But it looks pretty easy to keep them in order because it looks like you got 3 short guys and the rest are long. Well, the short guys, the castings on the timing cover are shorter. There's a difference between your short and your long bolts. So I mean, it's pretty obvious. Okay, let's get all these bolts out. And let's pop this timing cover off. This little guy right here is just an oil slinger, and there's a spacer. So be sure you take these off before you send your crank out to a machine shop. I can't remember if this gear stays or not, but if it does come off, slide it off. If not, don't worry about it. A good machine shop will not mess with that anyway. Get these pistons out of here. You're going to want to mark these things. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. See, if this engine does not have any markings on it, so it's probably never been apart. Okay, so what I did, I loosened these nuts up until they were flush. And then I just took a rubber hammer and hit it. See, now it's falling back down. So that piston has released itself from the crank. And that rod cap there is pretty tight still. There we go. Just rock the rod cap loose. Take our 2 nuts off. And pull the cap. And let's see here if I can read anything on this bearing. Okay. It's kind of surprising this engine has such great oil pressure. Must have had some thick oil in it, because this bearing is actually a original Ford bearing, and it says 4-64 right about there, and it's not in that bad a shape either. So I guess one thing this person actually did do with this tractor was actually keep the oil changed in it. It's a miracle, considering how else the tractor is. And I just tapped the piston while I was holding on to it, just to kind of help release it. And it's still pretty tight, which is normal. I'm just grabbing something to see if to help push it out. And I'm just pushing on the back side of the piston. I really need a longer screwdriver or a rod or something for this. This one might work. Okay, and out comes the piston. It's a 5-ring piston. You got basically 2 oil rings here, 3 compressions. Okay, now let's get the rest of these pistons out, or last one rather. So you got the nuts off of the connecting rods. Just tapping it loose with the hammer, a rubber hammer. And that piston's out. There is a 2 here on this piston. I wonder if the other ones have that, because I just now noticed that. I don't know if the camera will pick that up, but there's a 2 right there and right there. I want to show you something that I found on my number 3 piston. I took the other 2 pistons out off camera just to save some video time. But look at these 2 bearings. Something got in between this bearing and the crank and cut these grooves in it. I have no idea what it is, but that's a pretty deep groove. I mean, fingers catching on and everything. It doesn't seem to affect my crank, but that's not good. You definitely don't want to see that. And there's actually a little number 3 right there. So again, if I can get the camera to focus on it, that little 3 right there. I don't know if that was done at the factory or if somebody's had this motor apart. We are now ready to pull our crankshaft out. Okay, and so to pull our crank, we have 3 of these main caps here with 2 bolts. The last one you can't see, it's off the camera, but it looks like this. It just goes all the way up. You basically just unbolt these, and you're going to try and just rock them loose with the bolts. And we'll pull these 3 caps off, and then I'll reach in here and lift this crank straight up. Something else. See how nice and easy that spins? Whenever you put this motor back together, if it doesn't easily spin like that, you need to stop and figure out why. Because something is wrong. Now these main caps, all 3 of them are different. Which the rear one is pretty easy to tell. It's larger, has room in it for a crank seal. Your other 2, they are different, but it's a little harder to tell. Your center one here that I'm working on right now is your thrust one. I'll show you what that means here in a second. But it's really similar to this first one. So these 2 you got to be sure you get right. And these are directional. Like I say, your rear one is pretty obvious how it goes in. But your other ones, there's a little arrow right here on both of them pointing towards the front of the engine. Now, as you see, that journal there, nice and easy to come loose. I just grab the bolts, squeeze it, and lift it up. The bearing looks pretty good. Let's see if this one will cooperate. It probably won't. As I say, this one's a thrust one. Now, what I meant by the thrust, see how this bearing, it has this lip here? This is designed to control the forward and back movement of the crank. There is a spec for this. You have to make sure it's in spec. That is designed to locate that crankshaft forward and backwards. Once again, bearing looks great. Okay. Here's the rear. Like I say, it's pretty obvious how different it is. As you see, that white right there is actually a seal. And these are a pain in the butt. I hate them. When I did mine on the 861, I actually took and just filled this full of silicone right through here. Now this bearing, we got a little bit of copper shining. I'm ready to pick the crank up out of here. And I don't know what this crank weighs. It's been a while since I had one out. But she's pretty heavy. And here's the other half of our main bearings. These 2, the front and the rear, are the same. Thrust bearing's different. You can see the thrust surface on this one. Now, the only things we have left in our block are our dipstick tube and our camshaft and our lifters. And of course our bearings, which they pop out. So the camshaft has a thrust plate. So here's our cam. There's a bolt there and a bolt here. Now I can probably get my socket in there to get both of these guys and just unbolt it. There's also a snap ring right here. The snap ring will take your gear off. And our cam will slide out. And just be easy taking it out. My thrust plate on here looks pretty good. The one on my 861 was actually bent. There's our camshaft. One other thing, each of our little valve tappets, lifters, what do you want to call them, they need to come out now. Once again, keep them in order. They just slide out of the bore, pretty simple. And just to get you a nice wide view of what the engine looks like all tore apart. Just a bare block. And then here's all of our parts all laid out. Just ready to be cleaned up, taken care of, machined, work done, and put back together.